and welcome to Newsnote. On tonight's show, we're going to be reviewing research which looks at alcohol and cannabis use and whether cannabis should be legalised in the current political debate. We're also going to be discussing whether Bath University should face closure over current unemployment rates. And in new breaking news, a woman has recently lost her hand in a cold water paint task at Bath University. Alcohol and cannabis are two of the most widely used psychoactive drugs in the world, with their respective active components, ethanol and THC, both impairing brain functioning. In recent years, we have seen global reconsideration on use of cannabis, with countries such as Portugal, Italy, Ukraine, and most of South America decriminalising the drug, as well as other countries making it medically available. And in the recent 2016 general election, the Liberal Democrat Party, in their manifesto, put forward plans to legalise cannabis, which brought this issue to the forefront of UK politics. Previous research by Chait and Perry have found that alcohol impaired cognitive functioning more than cannabis on motor, psychomotor and cognitive tasks. However, much research such as that by Marks and McAvoy and also Perez-Reyes et al. Found that alcohol and cannabis have largely similar inhibitory effects. This led to the current research which investigates the differences between the two. The aim of this research was to extend the findings of previous experimental research and test the two drugs in a wider range of cognitive and behavioural measures. I would now like to welcome onto the show two of the researchers from the article, Stephen and Maxine, who will be discussing their research.
Good evening.
Good evening. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
So, Maxine, would you please like to tell us what you did and who was involved?
Sure. So, Jeremy, using a community newspaper, we recruited 5 healthy male volunteers who were paid $10 for every hour of participation. The participants reported drinking 4 to 15 alcoholic drinks per week and smoking 1 to 6 marijuana cigarettes per week. Throughout the study, we had 7 experimental sessions that lasted 3 to 4 hours each and were separated by 1 week. We had 3 different strains of alcohol and 3 different strains of cannabis, as well as 1 placebo group. For the sessions, participants were instructed to abstain from alcohol and cannabis use for 24 hours, which was measured using a breathalyzer and a urine specimen. During each session, 16 drinks of 30 milliliter each were consumed and 16 puffs of cigarettes were smoked. We collected 3 blood samples throughout the study, 1 before dosing, 1 midway through, and 1 final blood sample once dosing was complete. We then asked participants to complete 5 computerized tests, all testing different aspects of human cognition.
So, do you tell us more about the tasks the participants took part in?
Gladly. Firstly, we tested reaction time, where participants had to respond to the appearance of a symbol in the middle of a video monitor as rapidly as possible by pressing the left button of a joystick that they were holding. We also conducted a DSST test, which stands for Dante's Subject Standardized Test, which is a commonly used combined psychological measure. We then tested their number recognition skills, where participants had to hold both buttons of a joystick, which caused 5 to 7 random digits to appear on the screen, then blank and 1 digit appearing again. If the single standing digit was in the first set of digits, then the participants had to release the left button of the joystick, and if it wasn't, they had to release the right button of the joystick. We then went on to testing time perception. 3 different time intervals of 5, 20 and 80 seconds were presented in a random order, signaled by the appearance of a symbol on the monitor. The subjects then had to estimate its duration and reproduce the interval by pressing a button for the perceived duration. Lastly, we did a word recall test, where 20 nouns, one by one, appeared on the monitor every 2 seconds, and the participants had to immediately write the remembered words down during a 2-minute free recall period.
So, now we know what you did in great detail. Stephen, can you please tell us what you found?
Firstly, I'd just like to say thank you for having us on today to talk about this complex issue. 22 years after our study, I never thought I'd be on television again. If I knew, I might have done my hair this morning. In terms of digit substitution, we found that marijuana had a larger impact throughout the testing, and although alcohol impaired, it returned to placebo levels towards the end of the study, which has been well documented throughout research to show that marijuana stays in the system much longer than alcohol. In questions we asked the participants, they responded to feeling drunk more when they'd been given alcohol in the testing, and feeling stoned more when they've been given marijuana in the testing. This showed this was having the desired effect that we wanted in order to test the impairment on the performance cognitive categories. In terms of maximal alcohol impairment, this was shown to be 30 minutes post-drug administration, whereas marijuana was shown to have differing effects depending on the drug dose that was given. 90 minutes for low doses, 60 minutes for moderate doses, and immediate for high doses. This shows the amount is a key factor in impairment, and this may have potential implications for roadside testing. Interestingly, alcohol and not marijuana increase the number of incorrect answers in our number recognition test. This potentially has implications for use of number plate recognition in roadside testing for those who are intoxicated to see if they can drive safely.
Thank you for those very in-depth results. Would you like to now present them visually, please, for the viewers?
We would love to. Thank you.
As you can see from our drunk subjective ratings, those who had a high dosage of alcohol felt more drunk. Although this seems obvious on a subjective rating scale, it is worth considering that each individual has a different reaction to alcohol. In terms of the DSST results, comparatively to marijuana, we can see that the number of correct responses was more continuous and returned to a placebo level, compared to the effect they may have had on marijuana use due to individual tolerance levels.
We can also see on the alcohol DSST test that the highest dosage of alcohol has a significantly worse effect on correct responses than when in cannabis, where it's a bit more individualized according to every person. So it's not really a clear pattern as you can see in alcohol. And as we can see here for the subjective rating for marijuana, the placebo group felt little to no stoned, whereas the highest dosage felt the highest stoned, where over time that declined. And we can see an overlap here between two groups where the lowest dosage felt more stoned at some point than the medium dosage.
Although the patterns in these two graphs do look quite similar, as we can see from the two highest dosage of alcohol and marijuana, alcohol's highest dosage produced a lower number of correct responses to marijuana, suggesting that it had a more detrimental effect on the cognitive functioning in the word recall test.
So we've got Maxine here to discuss the implications and limitations of the study. So, Maxine, what are these results suggesting?
Well, my research team and I have concluded that both alcohol and cannabis are comparable in magnitude in terms of their neuropsychological effects, specifically on memory, coordination and other factors such as neuropsychological performance. And this in itself is a crucial contribution to the decriminalisation of cannabis, as it is not any more harmful than alcohol, yet it is illegal.
But here you're relying on a lab study that's over 22 years old. This doesn't have any good implications for your historical validity. Haven't things moved on since then?
Well, Jeremy, there's a lot more recent research as well, such as FIRE et al. 2017, that suggests the same as our findings do. Also, a lot more recent research has suggested that cannabis is actually a lot better than what we have found. And yes, it is difficult to generalize our findings onto the entire drug usage and alcohol consumption population, as we only had 5 male volunteers. But for example, the doses of THC that we have used mimic the typical recreational use.
So you're saying to me that cannabis can be legalised due to 5 men having half a joint at a computer screen? Can you seriously say the UK is your target population from such a small sample?
No, Jeremy. This was one of the first studies of its kind where we did a dose-by-dose exploration. So this was not meant to address any issues concerning legalization, but our implications definitely weighed on the debate.
So speaking of doses, how can you know what doses of each drug will cause equivalent levels of intoxication and how it will affect individuals with such a small sample? Surely there's likely to be great distortion from individual differences.
Surely there was consideration of individual differences in our study between the participants that influenced the effect of intoxication. These are personalized features such as body weight, level of food intake or drug history in the past. But as mentioned in our discussion, animal studies with a lot more control about these features, such as Molina Holgado et al. From 1994, have also shown the memory impairing effects of THC. List et al. 1987 have also shown the negative effects of alcohol on learning and memory. So our study, on the other hand, is a lot more a realistic representation of drug and alcohol usage. So it does not have as much control as other studies in terms of the intoxication effect.
Well, thank you very much, Maxine. That's definitely clarified some issues. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Jeremy.
I would like to introduce to the show Mary Jane, who is an advocate for legalisation of cannabis and also a big cannabis enthusiast herself. Mary Jane, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I would like to ask you where research is heading in the current political debate about cannabis today.
Well, today it's less focused about the physiological responses to cannabis and more on kind of the brain functioning and measuring brain activity using things like fMRI scanners. So if we look at Thayer et al. 2017, they were looking at grey and white matter in the brain. White matter being more nerve fibres and grey matter being the darker parts of the central nervous system. And what they found is cannabis had no effect on the volume of these. However, they did find that alcohol was more damaging even in adolescence. So this is worrying when you think that in a 30-day study, alcohol had a significant effect on crucial parts of the brain.
So, following on from this, do you believe that the UK should follow in the footsteps of the Netherlands and states like California? Should we really be selling cannabis for profit? This is the future of our country that are going to have to deal with this, that are going to be taking these drugs.
No, I agree completely. Like, we're talking recreational use. So,
But recreational use means that it's available for everyone on the streets.
but I just think it's incomprehensible that at the moment it's considered a Class B drug and it carries a prison sentence of 5 years. To me, the research has shown it's not that dangerous.
Not that dangerous. People have linked this to schizophrenia, one of the worst psychotic disorders. How can you seriously say that?
Well, if you look at research carried out by Bora et al. 2010, actually it's saying that cannabis is linked with schizophrenia to better cognitive skills. So those who suffer with schizophrenia have actually had a better working memory, better executive functioning. So it's not all negative effects, and perhaps it's merely an association between cannabis and schizophrenia rather than a direct correlation.
So, proposing that you were able to get legislation through, how are you supposing to regulate cannabis and the selling of it and profit?
Well, if you take California as an example, you could use medical regulation. So things like getting your doctor to sign it off so you have a card for marijuana. And definitely age restrictions.
Age restrictions have never stopped young people from accessing alcohol in any way. How do you suppose that that's actually going to make a difference?
Well, I feel like you can't regulate what parents do, but you can educate people on the amounts they should be taking, and also having age limits in shops where it's sold is the only thing we can really do as part of the government to ensure that it's being safely consumed.
Okay, well, I'm not convinced that's good enough, but we'll leave that there. So, in terms of actually which parties have suggested this, you've only actually had support from the Liberal Democrats. They're the only party that have put forward in a manifesto in the 2016 general election proposals to legalise cannabis. The two biggest parties, the Conservatives and Labour, have not put any legislation forward. They haven't suggested anything. What do you say to that?
Well, what I'm saying is the Liberal Democrats are one of the biggest parties in the UK. It's part of the top three.
They've only got 12 seats.
The fact that we have support from one party is suggesting we're getting more into the mainstream, but also their arguments are more practical arguments for decriminalisation of marijuana. So we're talking it would save 1 million police hours if the police actually stopped investigating small recreational use of cannabis. So they're looking at it from a different angle, whereas perhaps the other parties don't want to get involved in a controversial debate. They're just looking for votes.
Okay, but you say that the police are going to save all this money, all this time, but there's a reason the police are looking for it. It's because it's believed to be a harmful drug, you know. It's not just schizophrenia. We've also got links to depression, paranoia. You know, there's lots of other things involved.
Well, the only thing I can say to that is that if you legalise, you have regulation. And that's my main argument here, and I think that's what the researchers earlier were saying, is that it is on par with alcohol in terms of how harmful it can be in certain effects. However, if you do regulate it like you regulate alcohol, then it can be consumed safely and no longer be criminalised.
So you're saying that legalising allows for regulation, which makes it a lot safer than if it's illegal. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, that is exactly what I'm suggesting.
Okay. So how does alcohol compare to cannabis, in your opinion?
Well, I contacted a PhD student at the University of Bath who actually provides some real professional insight into this area, and I thought you might be interested to hear it.
Yep, definitely.
So on legalisation, he says an open ban on all existing, future and psychoactive substances does not actually stem from an evidence-based approach in decision making. So we need to focus on a harm reductionist perspective. So you only place restrictions on the most harmful drugs. So in this case, as marijuana, in Craig's professional opinion, causes relatively low harm compared to other drugs, regulation should actually lead to the legalisation of marijuana. His opinion on alcohol as a legal and widely consumed drug is that it is a dangerous drug and it impacts not only the consumer but others who are surrounded by alcohol. And there are very few health benefits to alcohol, so it does not outweigh the negative consequences that alcohol causes. But he's also not convinced that current policies are adequate to protect society from the harms of such drugs. And then when he compares the impacts of marijuana as an illegal drug and alcohol as a legal drug, he reiterates that the government does have a disregard for evidence and a harm reductionist approach to the law on drugs, and he suggests that the current system needs to be reformed.
So do you believe that it is the government orchestrating this opinion on cannabis?
Absolutely, Jeremy. If you use Professor Nutt as an example, he was forced to resign as chief drug advisor to the government in 2009 after he posted a research report that alcohol and tobacco are more harmful than many illegal drugs, even crack cocaine and heroin. So the government deemed this as damaging to their message on the dangers of drugs, so they fired him.
How could you possibly believe that alcohol is more harmful when it's normalised and so widespread?
Well, like Professor Nutt says, alcohol usage is so high because it's driven by the illegality of safer illegal substances such as cannabis and ecstasy. If you look at the factual evidence, alcohol is ranked as the 5th most harmful drug, whereas cannabis is rated 11th when you take into account physical, social and addictive harm caused. According to Blake Moretto and Nutt's report, alcohol accounts for 8,000 deaths compared to cannabis, which only accounts for 19 per year.
But Maxine and Stephen's study suggests that they have similar psychological effects, so how do you explain this disparity?
Well, of course they have similar psychological effects as they're both mind-altering substances. However, I believe the difference is in their long-term physical effects on the body. If this debate was based on health rather than a political agenda, then I believe marijuana would be legal.
Okay, well you've made your point. Thank you very much, Mary Jane, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
So there you have it. You've heard the arguments on both sides of this topical debate, but there's no doubt we have a long way to go before this issue is settled. I would like to thank all our guests tonight for coming on the show, and we'll see you tomorrow at the same time. But for now, it's goodbye from me. Goodbye. I would like to You've had arguments on both sides of the.
I don't agree with you there. I actually, the research I've carried out, I haven't carried out any research.
You can be like, dude.
Cucumber.